If your fantasy team needs help, these are players that you should be buying for your fantasy football rosters. The first guy here is going to be JK Dobbins. And you'll remember 2 weeks ago, we had JK Dobbins actually as a sell, and we got a lot of crap for it. The reason for that was because he had 2 tough matchups coming up. The first one against the Pittsburgh Steelers, the second one against the Kansas City Chiefs. The last 2 weeks for JK Dobbins when you're looking at his production. 6.9 points against Pittsburgh. It's nice, but it's not great. And then 7.7 points against Kansas City. And obviously, based off of what we saw in the first 2 weeks, 21 and 19 points, having 40 points over the first couple weeks, a lot of people were valuing J.K. Dobbins really, really highly. We were not, just because there were 2 things in our mind. Number one, we knew that there was a good chance he would get hurt, which at this point can't be a good excuse not to have J.K. Dobbins because literally every running back is getting hurt. And number 2, we knew he had a tough schedule. But now you go into the bye with J.K. Dobbins. And so not only does the owner of J.K. Dobbins have to deal with him not having him this week, but you also have seen him not perform the last 2 weeks. I think these things combine for you potentially getting a pretty good price on J.K. Dobbins. And the thing with J.K. is we obviously know he has 20-point upside in fantasy football. This is a reason to go out and send trades for him. The reason against sending trades for him obviously would be if you believe that A, that the first 2 weeks were a fluke, or B, you'd believe that he's going to get injured at some point this season. But again, the thing to consider here is you've got guys like Bijan and Breeze coming out and laying eggs. You've got a bunch of guys getting hurt. You had JT get hurt this week, right? And so with the running back landscape as ugly as it is, where you have Bucky Irving, who is now relevant. Braylon Allen, who is now relevant. Kareem Hunt is now relevant. It's bad, guys. And so JK is a guy, I think if you can get him fairly cheap, you should send offers. Now, I don't know exactly who to tell you, hey, send this guy for JK, because our rest of season rankings, the current market values haven't really settled yet for 2 weeks in a row of JK Dobbins scoring in single digit points. But I do think you send as low an offer to start as you can for JK and see how cheap you can get him.
Like depth.
If you're like depth guys, exactly. Guys you don't have to start. If you have to send a starter for JK, like a startable wide receiver, a flexible wide receiver, I'm hesitant depending on the receiver, but that's the kind of deal I'm making is like a depth guy, trying to move a depth guy for JK Dobbins, because JK Dobbins is a guy you can flex every week. And so if your team needs running back help, if your team needs even depth help, or even if the person in your league is just giving up on JK Dobbins altogether, I do think now that you have the bye week, and now that you've seen him not perform a couple weeks, it's going to get a little bit more favorable, and I think he could end up being a good buy for your fantasy football team.
Yeah, and one interesting thing to note that should hopefully help with your opinion of J.K. Dobbins and why we think he's a buy looking forward as well is Dobbins' last 2 matchups has been really tough. It's been against Pittsburgh's run defense and Kansas City. That's why we ranked him lower than consensus in the fantasy space, and we got a lot of crap for it, and we were right. He scored 7 points in each of those games. He was very disappointing. When you're looking at the first 2 games and the carries that he got, he had 10 attempts and 17 attempts to Gus Edwards' 11 and 18 in those first 2 weeks, which is why we thought that he was a sell. Now you're looking at his opportunities in weeks 3 and 4. Again, tougher matchups, but his carries were 15 and 14, rushing attempts to Gus Edwards 3 and 6, and Edwards' snap share is going down. So I think you're looking at Greg Roman. I think you're looking at the Chargers offense as a whole, and I believe that they're expecting to lean on J.K. Dobbins for the rest of the season, barring injury, of course, which is going to be the case for any running back. But that to me is a really, really good sign of J.K. Dobbins actually being able to sustain some consistent success for the rest of the season in better, more friendly matchups. And the next guy that we're going to have here is Cooper Kupp, who is becoming further and further removed from his ankle injury. We just saw an announcement this week that said he could be back as early as 2 weeks. It could be more than that. It could be 2 to 3 weeks. And Puka Nacua is also looking at probably about a month remaining on IR as his timetable. So Kupp expected to be back before Puka is. And you're looking at the Rams offense as a whole right now. It's been very up and down for them. They were able to pull off a really impressive win last week, but in week 4, they lost to the Chicago Bears, who just lost to the Indianapolis Colts. It was not pretty. And the receiving assets in that offense, Tutu Atwell, the leading receiver with 6 targets, 4 receptions, and a lot of yards, because that's what Tutu Atwell does. Jordan Whittington actually getting the most amount of targets in that offense. He gets 8 targets. And then Demarcus Robinson, who we thought was going to be the number 1 option there, gets 3 targets. Tyler Johnson, 1 target. Every single week, it is anyone's guess who's going to be the lead wide receiver there. And I think we've learned very quickly that it wasn't just Puka Nacua in a good system and reaping the benefits of Sean McVay. I think Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are just really, 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 really good wide receivers that make Sean McVay's life easy. Seriously. And when Cooper Kupp comes back, you are immediately, the reason we have Cooper Kupp as the buy is because he's coming back earlier than Puka Nacua is. Mm-hmm. When he comes back, he is immediately a top top 8 to 10 wide receiver every single week in our rankings. And that's his upside. I mean, his upside is wide receiver 1 every single week with Matt Stafford. You saw it the week that Puka Nacua was out and it was just Kupp. You got 20 freaking targets. It is, you are looking at the upside of like 2021 Cooper Kupp. So get ready for it. I know a lot of people, again, are suffering from so many injuries that they are becoming more and more willing to move off of guys like Cooper Kupp where they can't afford to wait 2-3 more weeks. I would implore you, please go capitalize on the discount now. It will pay off.
Yeah, and one thing also medically to consider between these two guys is a lot of people have said that Puka's injury is going to be harder to actually come back to full strength from, that it might linger a little bit longer. With Kupp, I feel like he can come back from that, and you feel a little bit more comfortable about that rest of season than you do.
Puka's a guy where I would see them ease him back into his role. Right?
Especially because it's an injury where it typically lingers like that. And so that's a big difference between the two guys as well when you're talking about which one can you buy, because you could buy you could buy both of them. But I think Kupp from a lot of standpoints is a better one to buy here. Let's talk about Tee Higgins. And I have Tee Higgins in the Flock League. Speaking of Flock, if you want our free rankings, you want the free trade calculator, go to flockfantasy.com/domain, use code domain. You can get those both for free. All you have to do is use code domain when you sign up. You can also ask us questions there and things like that, get team reviews. But with Tee Higgins, 8 targets a game through the first 2 games. You had 6 targets. You had 10 targets this last game. And this is more of a, if you watched the game, you understand it. Because he only had 9 points this week, because he only caught 6 of those targets for 60 yards, right? Didn't have a touchdown. But as I was watching the game, and I was a little bit infuriated because I saw Joe Burrow trying to get Tee Higgins the ball, and he had J.C. Horn on it. And so J.C. Horn was obviously a good cornerback, right? And he held him a couple times. They had multiple penalties called on plays. I think there were like 3 straight penalties where he was trying to target Tee Higgins in the red zone. And I do think that Tee Higgins, when you're looking at his production in the last couple of years, he obviously is capable of scoring some touchdowns. You didn't see a ton of that last year, but the year before that, he had touchdown in 7-8 games. So I think he is a guy that has pretty good red zone upside. And when you couple that with the fact that he did get double-digit targets today, and the fact that the Bengals should continue to get better. I say should, but they should, right? They did look a little bit better, I feel like, against the Panthers. The Panthers were competitive, and we expected it, but that's not really saying a ton, right? With T, I just feel like he's going to be the high target guy in that offense. When you're looking at Chase, obviously Chase was able to produce today as well, but Chase hasn't gone over 7 targets this season, and Tee Higgins did it in his second game back. And Tee Higgins is also a dude that he really could have gotten more snaps today. He played less than usual, but again, it was because they were running out the clock for a lot of that game. They were trying to just basically take it to where Carolina was out of time, right? And so looking at his snap count, though, 43 snaps compared to Jamar Chase's 53. He ran 3 less routes, but he had 4 more targets. And so I think with Tee Higgins being the high-volume guy in a Joe Burrow offense, and the fact that he's still fairly cheap right now because he hasn't done anything. He's not really making a splash, not really making headlines. Usually when you have that type of player, you can go get him a little bit cheaper than probably what he's actually worth. And so Tee Higgins is a guy I'd send a bunch of feelers on. I would send starters for Tee Higgins, but again, flex level guys probably. I like flexing Tee Higgins. So if you can flex Tee Higgins, I feel really good about that this year. And I do think he's somebody that is attainable in terms of his price on the trade market. So go send some offers for Tee Higgins and see how cheap you can get him in your leagues.
I'd also be sending some offers for Rhamondre Stevenson. I know it's ugly. Again, the running back landscape is ugly right now because of the injuries, okay? There are a lot of people that are desperate for running backs, and they are trying to go acquire running backs at a discount, and you can't really find any right now that you're super comfortable with across the board, because the ones that are safest are almost untouchable, right? Rhamondre Stevenson is one of the few guys that you are confident will be the lead running back for the Patriots for the rest of the season and is going to get a consistent amount of work every single game. And yes, I know he had 0.3 points against the Jets. Yes, I know he only had 6 points against San Fran. Let me reinforce those opponents, the New York Jets and the San Francisco 49ers. Two teams that are trying to make a Super Bowl run this year and have some of the better defenses, the better defenses in the league, right? And the Patriots are a rebuilding team. You had Rhamondre coming off of 20-point and 16-point games in the first 2 weeks of the season. Very, very promising. You loved seeing the workload, 25, 21 carries. His workload went down. New England was down in those games against San Fran and the Jets very, very quickly, so they were not calling the game from let's just run the clock out and run the ball like crazy. That wasn't their game plan. after it was ruined in the first 15 minutes of the game. So you're seeing other opponents in the future like Miami, who doesn't have Tua, right? Like Houston, who has shown that they can give up a significant amount of production with running backs this year so far. And then you've got Jacksonville, who's 1-3. You've got Tennessee, Chicago, the Rams, Miami again, the Colts. Like, these are the types of matchups that I'm looking at for Rhamondre Stevenson, where I'm like, he can absolutely from volume alone put up 15 points at least. And that's what you've got to expect from a guy who, again, has demonstrated that he can take on a bell cow workload, does have some receiving upside as well. He saved his day today, very, very inefficient on the ground, but he did have 4 receptions for 20 yards, so that was 6 points in the air. So with Rhamondre right now, he has never been cheaper. When he was starting to look like a guy who may have been a league winner the first 2 weeks of the season, really, really tapered off. We expected that. Now expect him to start to rise up our rankings consistently in the next month or so.
Real quick, majority of you guys aren't subscribed according to our metrics. If you would do us a huge favor and drop a like and subscribe for us, tells us we're doing a good job and also helps support the channel, helps us make better videos. But let's get back to it. All right, let's move now to Christian Kirk. And obviously, Christian Kirk had a pretty slow start to the season. You saw him come out. He was largely unproductive. He had 3 points and 0.4 points in his first couple weeks. Not to mention, he wasn't really getting any targets. He's being outsnapped by Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. both. He wasn't really on the field for 3 wide receiver sets. This was a big red flag. When you're looking at his usage for this last week, however, Christian Kirk did have somewhat of a bounce back game, right? And I think this is... I think, in my opinion, I think the Jaguars came out and basically made it a point to get Christian Kirk the ball, because you don't get 12 targets after not getting any targets the first couple weeks on accident. And he came out and he had as many snaps as Gabe Davis, as Brian Thomas Jr. He ran as many routes as those guys, and he had more targets. He had 3 more targets than Brian Thomas Jr., and he had 7 more targets than Gabe Davis. And so I'm really encouraged by this. I do think that with Christian Kirk, if you're buying him, I still think he's cheap enough to where you can actually get him at a good price, considering the fact that he's had 22 targets over his last 2 games. And he's also had 1 touchdown in those games. He had a touchdown today. Obviously, without the touchdown today, he has 9 points. You don't feel as good about that. But the main thing here with Christian Kirk, and the reason why he's a buy in our eyes, is because of the targets. And we're going to be chasing targets. And so, like I said, leading the team in targets, leading the team in receptions, you feel better about Christian Kirk. And obviously, watching that game, I feel like they're getting him more involved on purpose. And that's encouraging. If you drafted Christian Kirk this year, you drafted him in like the 5th, 6th round. And so the issue, obviously, in the first couple weeks is that he looked like he was going to be one of the worst picks in fantasy football. He did, because I honestly didn't know if he was going to be involved. But now you see this team, and yes, admittedly, the offense has been much worse than we thought it would be. I'm the first person to admit that. The Jags are absolute butt cheeks. I'm not even sure Doug Peterson survives the season. But Christian Kirk, I think him being a slot wide receiver, it was always going to be he can get easy targets. I don't know why it didn't happen the first 2 games, but it's happened the last 2 games. You're betting one of 2 things here. You're either betting A, that the first 2 games are going to be more of what Christian Kirk is doing on an average week, or B, the last 2 games are what Christian Kirk is going to be doing on an average week. My personal guess, having seen Christian Kirk play over the last couple of years, even looking at 2023, and you're looking at his targets in that year when he played, obviously he was out after week 13, but games of 11 targets, 6 targets, 6 targets, 8 targets, 12 targets, 14 targets, 6 targets. And so, you know, you have those double-digit target spike weeks, and normally his floor is 5 or 6 targets and not 3 targets. And so my guess is that the first 2 weeks were fluky. I think Christian Kirk has his legs under him, and I think that he's going to be fairly productive from a fantasy perspective as well now. I'm totally comfortable sending, again, I'm going to start by sending depth pieces for Christian Kirk. Maybe somebody won't do it now that you've seen him get this many targets. But again, we're playing in casual leagues, a lot of us. How many of our league mates, and if you are a fantasy football diehard, whatever, yeah, you're probably going to play in league. Like, yeah, nobody's selling Christian Kirk. And again, this video or this particular section wouldn't be for you. If you're playing in a home league or a casual league, what they're going to see is he's had 11 and 15 points. And they might be like, yeah, it's all right, but if you want to pay that for him, I'll send him. And they're not looking at 10 and 12 targets. We are looking at targets. We're looking at targets with you, and we're telling you that this amount of targets for Christian Kirk, it's a really good sign. Even though the offense is a lot worse than we thought, you can go buy Christian Kirk. And again, with injuries stacking up now, you got Rashee Rice. If you lost Rashee Rice for the season, he's a really good buy low option, Christian Kirk, that you could end up plugging in your flex spot as you elevate other guys on your roster. And so I think with all the injuries going around, I think Christian Kirk is going to end up being a pretty good buy for this year.
Yeah, I think Brock Bowers is a curious case as well. This is another bad offense situation where Gardner Minshew, again, for as long as we No. Gardner Minshew is going to continue to be the starting quarterback there. It still is ugly. They were able to pull out a win against Cleveland this week without Brock Bowers really producing. And what I will say is I think Bowers is better off from a production perspective when Davante Adams is on the field, because Brock Bowers really is the second most talented receiving option in that offense. Jacoby Myers is very good. He's going to get his own there. But when you're talking about talent, Davante Adams is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He is highly regarded across the league, and that really is going to open up opportunity for Brock Bowers. And when you take that away, you can focus a lot more on the other weapons of that offense, and that includes Bowers. And again, this is a tough matchup against Cleveland. You obviously had them losing in an upset to Carolina, and that does look really bad on paper, but I think contextually you kind of have to give Vegas a little bit of a break with that game, because from a game plan perspective, that's really, really difficult to go into a game where you've got a backup quarterback in Andy Dalton that you don't really have any Carolina film on with this new coaching regime in Canales. You don't really know what they're going to do, and then they go and they lose like that. You generally see that happen with a lot of teams that they get like a second wind when they bring in a backup quarterback. Everyone's like, oh, is it a resurgence for this backup QB? And then they don't do anything for the rest of the season. Very, very typical. And again, Vegas kind of got the butt end of the deal with that matchup. So when you're looking at future matchups, they got Denver in week 5. They have Pittsburgh in week 6. That's tough. Then they've got the Rams. Okay. Then they've got Kansas City. Tough. Then they have Cincinnati, Miami. It's kind of all over the place, right? There's some tough matchups in there, some easier matchups. What I am counting on is Davante Adams playing. And I know there's been a lot of talk about Davante Adams potentially getting traded. For as much as we know that Davante Adams will be a Raider for the rest of the season. Like that's really all you can count on. If you're betting on anything else, I don't really know what to tell you. He's under contract. He's going to stay there. Brock Bowers, as long as Davante Adams is on the field, has the upside to be a tight end one any given week in this landscape. And as ugly as it is at the tight end position right now, any advantage you can get with a Brock Bowers level talent, again, is going to put you a leg. It's going to give you a leg up above your league mates. Again, everyone has to start a tight end every single week. If you can have a Brock Bowers in your starting lineup, I think that you have the upside to potentially win your week, any given week. I mean, 8 and 9 targets, first 2 games of his career. He's down to 4 and 3 against Carolina and Cleveland. Give him a break. They're still trying to figure things out offensively. And I think at the end of the day, Gardner Minshew is going to continue to lean on his best players, and talent is going to always transcend. So expect Brock Bowers to bounce back from this.
And then our last guy here is going to be Devin Singletary. And Devin Singletary was another guy that we listed as a sell just a couple weeks ago, because with the way that the running back room there was trending, you saw him go from like getting 70 to 80% of snaps. Really, you saw him get 80% in week 2 and then 70 in week 3. It looked like Tyron Tracy was going to take some of those valuable snaps. When you're looking at Thursday night and what he was able to do with the opportunity he got, he's splitting that backfield obviously with Jacob Johnson, Eric Gray, and Tyron Tracy. Tyron Tracy being the clear number 2 there, getting 16 snaps to Singletary's 47 actually. And you also see Singletary running 23 routes to Tyron Tracy's 9, and I think that's significant as well. They did get the same amount of targets, but Singletary in 2 games this season had 4 or more targets, and I think that's encouraging as well when you're talking about him having a potentially high floor. Now, obviously, you saw 4.3 points against Dallas, and you might be like, high floor, yeah, what are you talking about? And it's because he had 1 reception in that game. And honestly, like, it was also just because he wasn't very good. I think this is why you can buy him. Had Devin Singletary balled out, I mean, he's coming off his best game of the season in week 3 against the Browns of all teams. Though we didn't expect him to do anything against the Browns, but obviously you had a pretty long touchdown run, I think, in that one. 16 attempts for 65 yards there, and also had, again, 4 receptions on 4 targets for 43 yards. He was very productive. We were not expecting that. Now that you have seen him drop, 4 points against Dallas, the running back room and the share of opportunity for Devin Singletary has not decreased as much as we thought it would. And so because of that, you can now get him cheaper. And so I think with Devin Singletary, again, a couple things have changed. We do have more injuries now. We've had some other couple guys emerge. Singletary is a guy that, I mean, I think, again, you're trying to trade depth pieces for Singletary, because most good fantasy teams aren't going to be starting Singletary. Right? I mean, is that in a 12-team league at least? Actually,
maybe flexing him.
Maybe. Like, he's your borderline flex every week.
Yeah. But I mean, his price now compared to what it was even 10, 12 days ago is just, it's going to be cheaper with the nature of the usage that Malik Neighbors is getting, his showing against Dallas, right, on Thursday night. Yeah. I think he's more achievable at this point at a reasonable price. So.
I think so too. And again, I think you are going to see a couple games this season where he has 5 points. But when you're flexing a guy and he has 16 to 17 point upside, which I think he does, right? In the games where he scored touchdowns, 14 and 17 points.
It's good stuff.
That's good stuff, right? And so again, with Singletary, I just want to price check myself on this. When you're looking at like rest of season rankings overall, I just kind of want to see where Singletary falls here, because my guess is, again, he's going to be very, very attainable. He's valued in the expert consensus rankings on Flock, which by the way you can get for free. Code domain, flockfantasy.com/domain. You get the rankings for free. You get the trade calculator for free. He's valued next to Jake Ferguson. He's honestly still valued behind Isaiah Pacheco, which Evan Ingram, DeAndre Hopkins, Quentin Johnson, Carson Steele, but not after this week. Mostert, Christian Watson, Judy, Ford. I think he's very affordable. I think he's going to be even more affordable than this, because again, these rankings haven't really been updated by us yet. This is going to drop in our rankings, in all of our expert rankings. And so Singletary is a guy I think you can get pretty cheap. And again, if you're borderline flexing Singletary every week, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that. So there you go. That's our buys video for the week. You can go buy those guys if you need help with your fantasy team. Your time is running out. If you are 1-3, 0-4, that's not a good time. We can try to help you. We help turn your team around with the team blueprint. Go to flockfantasy.com/domain. Like I said, use code domain when you sign up. You get the trade calculator, you get the rankings for free. But then if you choose the Animal Mother Flocker tier, you get a team blueprint, which is a comprehensive breakdown of your fantasy team, and then what moves you need to make to save your fantasy football season and still defeat whoever you're playing fantasy football against. So like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. We could do one of those for you. But we appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you drop a like. Make sure if you play fantasy football, you are subscribed. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you later.